They say the winter of 1854 came colder than most, the kind that made breath hang in the air like ghosts refusing to leave. In the village of Norfolk, where the fields slept under a white silence, one man decided to wake them with cruelty disguised as entertainment. His name was Thomas Reddick, a farmer of great land and little kindness. He was known for his wealth, his temper, and a fondness for wages that often blurred the line between pride and madness. One night, surrounded by friends in the warmth of the tavern, Reddick lifted his glass and announced a bet so vile it turned laughter into unease. He said he would marry his cook, Margaret Prowse, within 2 weeks' time. Margaret was a kind, heavy-set woman, gentle to the bone but mocked endlessly for her size. To Reddick she was nothing more than a dare, a living token in a game meant to prove that beauty was nothing but obedience. The village erupted in whispers. Some laughed, some crossed themselves, but most believed it would pass. Another of Reddick's drunken boasts. Yet 14 days later, the bells of St. Mary's rang for a wedding no one wanted to witness. Margaret arrived in a gown too tight at the seams, her face pale, her hands trembling as if they already knew the cost of the promise. Reddick smiled wide, his arm around her shoulder like a man parading his victory, not his bride. The priest wrote in his diary that night that he had never felt the air grow so still during vows. He noted how the candles dimmed when she said, "I do." After the wedding, the house on Reddick Farm became quiet. The kitchen chimney smoked through every night, though no one saw Margaret beyond its walls. Children said they heard singing from inside, low, mournful hymns carried through the wind. Others swore they saw her shape in the window just before dawn, her hands pressed against the glass, her mouth moving in silence. But when asked, Reddick would only laugh and say she was tired, or shy, or not well enough for company. As weeks passed, her absence grew heavier, like fog over the fields. The milk soured faster. The dogs stopped barking at night. Even the church bells began to sound hollow, as if the village itself had caught a sickness of the soul. No one dared visit the farmhouse anymore. The servants came and went without meeting eyes. And every morning, a new pile of ashes appeared behind the kitchen door. The priest's diary ended with one final note, written in a shaking hand. The bride eats alone. The kitchen never sleeps, and the master's laughter sounds like hunger. That winter, no one spoke her name again. Yet, when the snow melted, her wedding dress was found hanging in the orchard, clean, dry, and warm to the touch. Something in that house had changed the air itself, and whatever began as a wager had already started to feed. They still talk about the banquet, though no one dares name it aloud. It began as a celebration, they said, but ended as something closer to a funeral. The great hall of Reddick Farm was lit with hundreds of candles, their flames trembling like frightened witnesses. Tables sagged beneath the weight of roasted meat, bread glazed with lard, and puddings thick with honey. The smell was suffocating, heavy, sweet, wrong. In the center of it all sat Margaret Prowse, the new bride, raised on a wooden platform so every eye could see her. She tried to smile. Her face flushed beneath the heat, but the laughter cut through her like knives. Guests toasted to her size, to her appetite, to her husband's charitable heart. Each cheer sounded less like celebration and more like a sentence being carried out. Thomas Reddick sat beside her, his grin wide and sharp. He poured her wine again and again, calling her my queen of plenty. When she refused another bite, he pressed the spoon against her lips. "Go on, my dear," he said loud enough for all to hear. They came to see what love looks like when it's fed. The hall roared with laughter. She swallowed tears along with her food, trembling under their eyes. One of the servants later said he saw her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles bled. As the night grew long, the laughter began to fade. The fire dimmed to an ember glow, and the guests slumped in their seats, drunk and uneasy. The band played slower, softer, until their notes trembled like prayers. Then from beneath the table came a faint scratching. It was quick at first, like a rat, then longer, harder. Someone whispered that it sounded human. Margaret's eyes darted downward, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but Thomas only laughed again, louder than before, drowning out the sound. A moment later came the scream, short, sharp, and gone too quickly to belong to the living. The musicians froze. The candles flickered out one by one, leaving only the firelight to paint the horror on their faces. Thomas rose slowly, his expression calm, and told them not to worry. His wife, he said, had retired early. He ordered the guests to finish their drinks and leave the dishes. No one argued. They filed out in silence, stepping over broken glass and spilled wine that looked too much like blood. For days afterward, no one saw Margaret. Yet the kitchen chimney smoked every night, the smell of roasting meat drifting through the village until dawn. Deliveries doubled, sides of beef, pigs, lambs, all disappearing behind the same closed doors. The stable boy, young and frightened, confessed years later that he once saw Thomas in the smokehouse at midnight, whispering softly into the shadows. He swore he heard a woman's voice answer him, weak but hungry, and that Thomas smiled as he fed her something wrapped in cloth. "My proof," he called her, "my promise kept." After that, the dogs wouldn't go near the farmhouse. The servants left, and the chimney never stopped smoking. Even now, on certain winter nights, they say the wind carries that same thick scent through the fields, the smell of a meal that never truly ended. By the time the estate fell silent, Reddick Farm had already passed through too many hands to remember who owned it first. The fields lay barren, the farmhouse sinking into its own rot, windows black with soot. For years no one dared go near, until the government sent surveyors to record what remained. It was 1897, and one of them, a quiet man named Joseph Hallett, wrote that the place felt as though something was still breathing underneath. While taking measurements, he noticed a patch of the cellar wall sealed with a dark, sticky pitch. He tapped it once, then again, and heard the hollow echo of something waiting. When the workers pried the boards loose, a rush of cold air spilled out, smelling of ash and iron. The lantern light trembled as they descended. The cellar was small and low-ceilinged, lined with soot-stained bricks. At first it looked empty. Only broken chairs, fragments of old crockery, a table warped with age. But then Hallett saw it. Hanging on the far wall, untouched by dust or decay, was a portrait, Margaret Prowse. Her face was rendered with almost loving detail. The soft roundness of her cheeks, the folds of her gown, the shine in her eyes. But the longer they stared, the less human she seemed. Her smile had been painted too wide, the corners of her mouth pulled so far they split the skin. Black thread was drawn across it, as if sewn shut by the artist's hand. Beneath the painting sat a table, and around it bones, dozens of them, arranged in perfect symmetry. Each was clean, white, polished like ivory. They were set before empty plates, with rusted utensils placed neatly beside. Hallett counted 13 seats. The coroner's notes from that day mention evidence of deliberate preservation, as though someone had boiled the remains clean to keep them from rotting. Among the bones were fragments of cloth, charred and still faintly smelling of grease. One of the men swore he saw teeth marks on a femur before it was taken away. The portrait was removed from the wall and placed under canvas for examination, but no one could agree on what it meant. Some said it was Reddick's guilt immortalized, his punishment painted by his own hand. Others whispered it was Margaret's revenge, that she had painted herself after death to keep him company in the dark. Whatever the truth, the file that followed was strange. Thomas Reddick's name appeared nowhere in the official report. The case was marked unknown subject, the evidence labeled ritualistic display. That night, Hallett returned to the cellar alone. The guards found him in the morning, sitting before the empty wall, His lantern burned out. The portrait was gone. He had written a single line in his ledger before his mind slipped into silence. She sat still, warm to the touch. The cellar was sealed again soon after, this time with stone instead of pitch. But locals say that when it rains, water seeps through the foundation and leaves stains shaped like faces on the brick. And sometimes, beneath the thunder, a woman's muffled laughter rises from the earth, quiet, patient, waiting to be seen again. When the old Reddick farm was sold again in 1928, the land had already earned its reputation as cursed ground. Yet the new owners, the Hammond family, dismissed the stories as country superstition. They were city people, ambitious, proud of their plan to restore what others had left to rot. The farmhouse was rebuilt stone by stone, the garden replanted, the walls painted white to hide their age. For a while, it almost looked alive again. But the locals warned them that the land remembered, even if the people had forgotten. The Hammonds didn't listen. It began quietly, like most hauntings do. The cows grew restless, refusing to enter the barn. Then one morning, the stable boy found a calf lying stiff in the straw, its body untouched, except for 2 neat holes near the neck. Over the next week, more animals followed. Sheep, chickens, even the family dog, all found drained of blood, their bodies stacked neatly beside the pantry door. The air inside the house turned thick, as if every breath was borrowed from something unseen. Food spoiled overnight, bread molded in hours, fruit blackened in its bowl. The family tried to bless the rooms, but the priest left before dusk, muttering that the walls themselves were listening. Soon the nights grew unbearable. The mother wrote in her diary that she heard a chewing sound from inside the walls, slow, wet and constant, as though something hidden behind the plaster was eating without end. The father tore up floorboards, searching for rats, but found nothing. The sound only grew louder. It followed them from room to room, pausing when they spoke, then starting again as soon as silence returned. The maid was the first to see her. One night she ran screaming into the snow, babbling about a woman crouched near the fireplace, plump, ash-colored, her dress in tatters. She said the woman's mouth glistened red, her eyes wide and shining like polished glass. When the maid fainted, she was carried back inside, trembling, her hands slick with something that wasn't blood but smelled close enough. The next morning, she was gone. Her bed was cold, the window open. The only thing left behind was a single bite mark in the wooden frame. Investigators arrived weeks later to find the family gone as well. The door stood open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with flies. Every plate on the dining table was set, each one holding a slab of raw meat, untouched but crawling with maggots. The walls bore faint impressions, as though pressed from the inside, the outline of fingers, a face, a mouth. One officer said he could hear chewing behind the pantry door. The others told him to stop listening. By spring, the Hammonds' names were erased from local record. The farm stood empty once more, its chimney breathing smoke without fire, and when night fell, those who passed by swore they heard it again, that slow rhythmic sound steady as hunger itself. The house that wouldn't starve was feeding again. By the middle of the 20th century, the story of the Reddick farm had turned into a warning told around fireplaces and bar counters, a tale mothers used to hush children who wasted their meals. They called her the cook, the hungry bride, or sometimes just Margaret, though few dared say her full name after dark. The legend said she wandered the fields when the moon was low, her figure large and pale against the crops, her eyes catching light like glass marbles. Men harvesting late claimed she would appear at the edge of the furrows, whispering softly, asking if they still wagered, if they still laughed at women who served them. The ones who answered never stayed to tell what happened next. By 1952, the story caught the interest of a journalist named Edward Gresham, a man known for chasing ghosts he didn't believe in. He arrived with a camera, a reel-to-reel recorder, and the calm arrogance of someone who thought fear was a rural disease. The locals refused to help him, though one old farmer warned, "She don't like company, and she hates waste." Gresham laughed, tossed his half-eaten sandwich into the dirt, and drove straight to the farm. That evening he set up his equipment inside the ruin. The walls were cracked, the ceiling sagging, but the smell of old grease still lingered, a sour sweetness that clung to his clothes. On the tape, his voice starts steady as he describes the kitchen, the fireplace, the cellar door sealed shut. Then, at 9:17 p.m., the sound changes. A low rhythmic chewing begins, wet and deliberate, like jaws working through raw meat. Gresham's breathing quickens. He calls out, thinking it's an animal, but there's another noise behind it, a woman's voice, faint, layered through the chewing. "The master promised," she says. "He promised I'd never go hungry." The chewing grows louder. Gresham's tone turns frightened. He whispers that something's moving in the dark, that the temperature has dropped, that he smells iron and smoke. Then comes a sound no one has ever explained. Laughter, deep and gurgling, merging with growls too low to be human. The tape ends abruptly with the clatter of his recorder falling. When authorities arrived the next morning, they found his car still outside, doors open, the engine cold. Inside the farmhouse, his camera was shattered, and the walls were streaked with greasy handprints leading toward the cellar. His body was never recovered. The official file lists the cause as unsolved predation, though locals simply said the cook had eaten again. Even now the story survives in the villages that border the old Reddick land. Farmers leave small offerings on their windowsills, bread, salt, bits of fat, and never mock hunger. Because sometimes on still nights you can hear chewing carried on the wind, and a woman's voice humming through the crops, asking softly, almost tenderly, if anyone still wants to make a wager. The Reddick property stands behind a rusted iron fence now, a patch of land forgotten by law but not by legend. The house itself is mostly gone. The roof caved in, the windows hollow as sockets, the stone foundation thick with moss. But no one calls it empty. Even in daylight, the place hums faintly, like something breathing through the soil. The trees grow twisted around it, their roots sunk deep into the ground that has fed too well for too long. Locals avoid it, though they still whisper its name in lowered voices, the farm that eats its dead. In 2019, a team of archaeologists arrived with the promise of answers. They weren't believers, only professionals drawn by the mystery that science couldn't quite silence. The site was scanned with thermal drones, their readings translating heat into color. What they found made no sense. The soil around the foundation seemed to pulse, faintly at first, then rhythmically, like veins beneath flesh. It wasn't temperature fluctuation, they said later. It was movement. Something in the ground was breathing. When they began to dig, the air grew heavy, damp with the smell of rot that wasn't there before. Beneath the first layer of dirt, they found fragments, bone, soil, hair, fused together as if melted into one another. Tests showed human and animal material, bound so tightly it was impossible to tell them apart. One fragment still bore the pattern of a dining fork pressed into it, as though the flesh and metal had met at a table, long before they turned to dust. The samples were sent to the regional museum for preservation, but were quietly returned within weeks. No exhibit, no paper, no mention. Only a letter stamped confidential, advising the researchers to leave the Reddick site alone. Those who worked there spoke of strange things afterward. One man said he felt the ground shudder beneath his boots, as if something large had turned in its sleep. Another swore he saw light flickering in the house's remaining window, soft, golden, like candlelight at a dinner no one was supposed to attend. At night, when they packed their tools, the faint sound of clinking silverware drifted through the air, delicate and precise. They thought it was wind at first, until it started to echo back in rhythm to their own footsteps. The land was closed off again that winter. The fencing was replaced. New warning signs posted, but the locals say it won't matter. The earth has grown fat on secrets. Each generation that came looking for proof left a little more of itself behind: curiosity, fear, blood. They say the farm has learned to feed on all of it. And on some nights, when the moon is sharp and the mist low, you can see figures moving where the dining hall once stood, shapes bent over invisible plates, mouths opening and closing in silence. Farmers nearby say their fields grow strangely fertile, crops sprouting twice as fast when planted near the property line, but the fruit spoils quickly as though it carries too much life. The animals avoid it. The air feels thicker there, and if you stand too close to the fence, you might hear it. The faint hum of breathing earth, and beneath it, the soft rhythmic clatter of a meal still being served. The wager that Thomas Reddick made in 1854 never truly ended. It stretched beyond him, beyond Margaret, beyond every witness who thought it was only a cruel joke. Because some hungers never die, they only learn to wait.